Welcome everybody. Appreciate you coming out on a Thursday night. As you can see, we'll be having a meeting here with Christo. So he was kind enough to come here from Detroit, fly all the way here. One of the things I wanted to do before we got started with Christo was just kind of talk about some upcoming events that are going to be happening here. So if you didn't know, we have the movie Diamonds Are Forever. So that's on Saturday night at 7 o'clock. So please come. We also have coming up the British invasion discussion. So that's going to be with Wayne Carini and Ken Gross and Michael Arnott. And that is on the 31st. So again, that'll be at 7 o'clock. So please come to that discussion. And also, so our very first car show on May 6th. So if you haven't seen, go onto our website. So we're taking the first 250 cars for the actual registration, and those will be placed out on the lawn in front of the museum. So that's our plan. So, yep, okay. Not for this show. This will be cars and trucks. Yep, thanks. Also, if we go to the next slide. Want to talk about upcoming exhibits that are coming up. So in April, we have 75 years of Porsche. Then in May, we're going to have the Georgia Tech Motorsports. So the college guys from Georgia Tech, all the motorsports, the different ones that they have, you know, like the Sun Racers and the Bajas and that, we're going to have here out front. Then we're going to do one called Hall of Fame, so American pickup trucks. That'll be coming in June. July, we're going to do factory drag cars. And then in August, we have Forged by Fuller. So if you know Brian Fuller from Caffeine and Octane, and also, Carfix, car shows. So he actually lives around the Atlanta area, has done a lot of custom kind of cars and motorcycles. So we'll have those. Then we have, if you're not familiar with the Czechoslovakian cars, the Tatras. So we have Streamlined Elegance, the Tatra tail. And then in October, we have the evolution of Bigfoot. So we're actually going to have the Bigfoot trucks going down our Great Hall. So that'll be exciting. So, okay, so thanks. So let me go ahead and introduce Christo Datini. He's the manager of the General Motors Design Archive and Special Collections. A professional archivist by trade. He has been the leader in GM's efforts to document, preserve, and promote its global heritage for more than 20 years. So I'll turn it on over here to Christo. One thing to keep in mind is if you could hold your questions to the end, and then what we'll do is we'll pass the microphone to you because we are recording it, and if you ask a question and we don't have the microphone, we can't get it on the recording. So thanks, everybody.
Oh, wrong way. Surprise, surprise. Howdy, everybody. As Bruce said, I'm Christo Datini. I manage the GM Design Archive and Special Collections, and I've been doing this for a while. Not presenting, but helping to preserve GM's past. We have an amazing archive both at General Motors Design and then more broadly within the corporation at our Heritage Center, and I just feel incredibly lucky that our corporation allows us to continue doing this activity because not all major corporations have such a thing. I also feel lucky that I was invited down to speak to you all tonight. It's a beautiful museum. It's my first time. I got the 25-cent tour, which was pretty great. And looking at the events that are coming up, it sounds like you have an amazing agenda for the next few months. I personally love the Tatras, so those are fun. And you can come to the car show on my birthday. So, all right. So tonight, I'm going to talk a little bit about GM design, the history of it. I'm going to talk a little bit about our archive team. I'm going to talk a little bit about what we do, and I'm going to do some show and tell because that's really what I'm best at as an archivist. There are far better people to talk about the cars and the nuts and bolts than me, but I can show you all the cool stuff behind the scenes that we have in the archive. So that's what I want to do tonight. So, all right. So our agenda, as I said, a little bit of GM design history. We can't talk about GM design without talking about the GM Technical Center, which is where we live. We'll talk a little bit about the design archive and our activities and how we do what we do. And then we're going to talk about the cars that we've loaned to the Savoy 59 Cadillac, but we're going to talk more broadly about fins. And then we'll talk a little bit about the Vega and the Chevette as well. So the history of design at General Motors really begins with Harley Earl. Harley Earl was a custom coach builder out in California, and he was designing cars for the Hollywood elite, custom cars very specifically. And he worked for an entity called Earl Coachworks. Earl Coachworks was owned by his father, and that entity was later purchased by a local dealership called Don Lee. And Don Lee was a Cadillac dealership, and Harley Earl was customizing Cadillacs for the local folks for Don Lee. And he was doing an excellent job, and he was making a name for himself. And back in Detroit, the head of Cadillac, Lawrence Fisher, would take trips out to California, and he got to know Harley a little bit. And in the mid-1920s, General Motors was looking for a way to differentiate not just the brands that it had, because at the time it had Buick and Cadillac and Chevrolet and Oakland, and soon it would have Pontiac and so on and so forth, but it was looking for a way to differentiate all of its brands within the marketplace. And our president at the time, Alfred Sloan, thought perhaps this would be through aesthetic appearance, through styling. And so Lawrence Fisher goes out to California, and he talks to Harley Earl, and he says, we're about to launch this new Cadillac. It's going to be a smaller vehicle. We want it to be sporty. We want it to have a custom look. Would you come on as a consultant to design this car? And he did, and that car is the 1927 LaSalle. And it debuted in March of 27, and it was a success. And by June of 27, General Motors had instituted what we called then Art and Color Section, what we call today GM Design. And Art and Color Section really started just with Harley Earl. It was a time where there were no trained professional automotive designers, so he had to scrape and scrap to bring people in. So he was bringing in coach builders, and he was bringing in draftsmen and illustrators from advertising agencies and folks that could work in 3 dimensions, because he was very into working 3-dimensionally. And he built this little team, and within the first several months, he had a team of about 50. And they started to work on, really at the beginning, they started to work on kind of the color and trim element of automobiles for General Motors. But they would very quickly build influence within the company. They did that by innovation. So one of the big innovations that Harley Earl and GM Design brought to the automotive industry was the idea of clay sculpting in full size. Legend has it that Harley Earl would do this as a child. He would, as a child, he would sculpt cars out of clay near his home, and he could work in he could see in 3 dimensions. He could work in 3 dimensions much better than he could in 2 dimensions. So as he rose up through the ranks at his father's business and then at Don Lee, all of the vehicles were modeled in clay. And so he brought this practice to General Motors, and General Motors still uses it today. So we will do scale models in clay as well as full-size models. And the reason we use clay is because it's very flexible. It allows for an efficient change of the design very quickly. It's very easy to throw a little bit of extra clay onto the model and scrape it away. It's much different if you're working in a wood or a plaster. Another innovation that kind of came out of GM Design in the early days was shared body platforms. So at the time, General Motors had a bodybuilder known as Fisher Body, and every brand had a chassis platform, and they would build bodies for these. And one of the engineers that worked for Harley Earl named Vince Capter noticed that these platforms were off by an inch there or an inch here, and to him it made no sense. Why wouldn't we commonize these platforms and then just differentiate the bodies around them? And that's what happened eventually. And I guess that's a double-edged sword, right? It was a good thing for a while, and then maybe cars became a little bit homogenous for a while, and now we're starting to differentiate them again. But from a cost standpoint, it really saved the corporation money, and it allowed it to grow throughout the 40s and 50s. Concept cars. So the idea of concept cars, I won't say it was invented by Harley Earl, that would be kind of crazy, but it was certainly popularized by Harley Earl. And in 1938, General Motors launched the Y-Job, that's the car on the far left. It was a look at Buick's future. And it was not just a promotional vehicle that they would take out to shows. In fact, it didn't really show at shows all that often, but it was something that Harley Earl would drive around the streets of Detroit to get reaction. And it was his daily driver, and I want to say it has somewhere in between 25 and 30,000 miles on it. We still own this car. If you want to see it, you drive down to the Vero Beach Museum of Art, because it's down there for a little while longer, I think. LeSabre followed the Y-Job and kind of started this 1950s bonanza of concept cars, where we would hold these automotive shows that we referred to as the Motorama just about every year, and send out half a dozen concept cars. LeSabre was kind of this jet age vehicle, and it really introduced, or it kind of popularized the idea of fins. You can see fins on the back there. It also had like a fuselage type nose cone in front. It had an afterburner in the back, so when you hit the brake, it lights up. It also has a wraparound windshield, which would become ubiquitous in the industry. And then the other one up on the screen is Firebird 3, and Firebird 3 is just incredibly futuristic. The design brief was, I want to see a car that an astronaut would drive to the launching pad. And so they developed a car that was gas turbine powered. It had an array of 7 fins. You drove it with a joystick. Still drives with a joystick. It's pretty great. Anyhow, so probably the most important thing that the early art and color section did for the automotive industry is it functioned as a training ground for automotive designers at a time where there was no professional education available for them. The idea of industrial design was just coming into vogue within colleges, and there was no transportation design department at any college. And so, as I said, Harley Earl was bringing these folks in and training them and building out the studio system. And some of them just didn't click at General Motors, and they would move on to other companies. And some of them became leaders at other companies. And they took along the methods and the processes and the idea, not necessarily like the design ideas, but the studio system, the process ideas, and it kind of proliferated. And this is why today most design organizations function similarly to what was done in the past at General Motors. So when we think about GM or GM design, we're thinking about cars and trucks very specifically. But that's not all that was designed at General Motors over the years. Trains, bicycles, tanks, lunar rovers. The lunar rovers that went to the moon on Apollo, I think 15, 16, 17, were designed at General Motors. We also did appliances. We owned Frigidaire for something like 60 or 70 years. And so we did refrigerators and washers and dryers and stoves and ovens. Also Delco radios and vacuum cleaners and this lovely little car vacuum that I think is kind of fantastic. And then, of course, exhibit design. I mentioned the Motoramas. We also did exhibits for the World's Fair, Futurama. We did internal shows at GM. We'll talk a little bit more about that later. And then on the very right-hand side of the slide, you're seeing something more recent, which is actually Test Track at Disney Epcot, which we collaborate with Disney Imagineers on. And so those are kind of, I guess, the scope of GM design and some of the innovations. Now I want to talk a little bit about the design process, because the process as it was back in the day is very similar to how it is today. Really, the big change is the tools. So it all starts with two-dimensional sketching or drawing. In the past, most of the sketches were done either pencil on vellum or Prismacolor pencils on Canson paper. Sometimes they use watercolors or gouache, markers, Flowmaster ink, but in kind of the physical form, if you will. Today, some designers still work in kind of the manual setting, but most designers are doing it electronically. And it's the tool. You still have to have the skill that you had back in the day, but it's really, the tools allow you to move faster. So here are some examples of sketches. The upper row are Cadillac sketches from the 1950s. On the left is a sketch by Chuck Jordan of 59 Eldorado Brome. On the right is a sketch of an interior for an early 50s Cadillac by Irv Verbicki. And then on the bottom, you're seeing sketches that are actually done digitally. On the left is an interior of our Celestiq show car, and on the right is one of the original sketches for the exterior of the Celestiq. From the small drawings, we go to full size. So oftentimes these full size renderings would be done in airbrush. In the 1960s and 1970s, there was an innovative technique to do these drawings in tape, so like black gaffer tape of varying sizes, and they would stretch out the lines. And some of the designers were incredibly talented at doing this. I'm trying to think what his name was, but they used to refer to this one guy as Tape, because he always had a roll of tape kind of on him. Three-dimensionally speaking, we start with scale. Typically that means a third scale, and that is historically true. Many third scale models would be done for each program to look for a theme. It's the same with the sketches. The designers would be churning out 20 or 30 sketches a day. The sculptors would be working on several smaller scale models so they could evaluate a theme. And then once a theme was selected, they would go larger, full-size clay models. This is something that is still done today. It is done in collaboration with the digital tools. Oftentimes when a vehicle platform, like let's say a vehicle platform is being instituted, we already know what the size is going to be, where all the regulations are, the hard points. So there's a basic shape. So they will take that, which is math data, and they will mill that out so there's a basic shape. And then these incredibly talented sculptors will come behind and they will interpret the sketches in 3 dimensions in full size. And it's a give and take between the digital and the physical sculpting. They'll scan the physical model, they'll take it into the tube, they'll do a little bit of adjustment, it'll go back out to the physical model, they'll do some more adjustment by hand. And during the early days of the pandemic, no one was actually able to be within the building, right? So they were working very specifically in virtual reality in 3 dimensions and with the digital models. And then when they would go back into the studio finally and mill those models out, they realized that the proportions were off, or things just weren't right, or aesthetically they just didn't work out. So it proved to those folks that were perhaps more pro-digital, let's go further digital, that we still need to use these full-size models for validation. Color, material, and finish is a huge part of the design process, selecting the interior and exterior colors, choosing what materials are going to be on the seats or on the door panels, And then what finish that the trim pieces will have. Is it going to be matte? Is it going to be brushed? Is it going to be chrome? One of the coolest things that we have at General Motors Design is this intense fabrication shop where they can pretty much build anything. If we can dream it up, they can build it, which is pretty great. There's metal workers and woodworkers and folks that work in plaster and a complete paint shop. On the screen, you're seeing some things from the past and some things from the present. Firebird 3 on the left being laid up in our fiberglass shop. And then on the far right, the assembly of the Buick Wildcat show car that I think debuted last year.
As the stylists surround our lives with functional forms of beauty, so they surround themselves in an atmosphere of aesthetic challenge. For the studio of design is an inspiration in itself. Working in an artistic atmosphere, men and women of taste and imagination come together to take on the task of creating a design which will express the American look. And here the dream begins, as the basic concepts of the design problem are defined and outlined. And thus, a design theme is established and agreed upon. Now there is only the stylist's creativity, his courage to dream, his knowledge and his experience. And from such dream work of individual stylists, there emerge finally a number of concepts. The stylists convert the smaller sketches into full-sized renderings and line drawings. To model the detailing for the finished design, a pliable material is needed. And the form is sculptured into a faithful bodily expression of the full-sized line drawing. Only a short step behind the exterior concept is the design theme of the interior and its concepts of complement in color. Textures must harmonize with colors, and fabrics must be durable as well as artistically compatible with the overall interior theme. At the same time, the individual art forms of decorations are sculptured in clay for a continuing development of the three-dimensional theme. Now, the dreams are presented for approval. Now and in the future, we can all depend on the stylist to beautify everything we need. Thanks to the men and women who design.
So that was a glimpse into the process, but also a look at GM Design Center, which is where the archive and the product development activity still happens today. So the GM Technical Center was designed in the early 1950s by Eero Saarinen, who has become a celebrated mid-century modern architect. It was the first campus-style corporate park. It kind of set a trend in that direction. It was meticulously crafted over the course of several years, and it took the idea was to bring engineering and design and manufacturing and research into a campus together so they could collaborate on the future of General Motors and its products. It is today a National Historic Landmark. Design Center was the last building to be built, and so Eero had actually by this point had gotten several other commissions. He had gotten quite a bit of recognition for his work on the tech center, and so he had gotten several other commissions. So GM designers in our product and exhibit design team did a lot of the finishes for the interior spaces at GM Design. The monumental pieces within the building, like the staircase and the teacup desk and the vice president's office up there on the right, were done by Saarinen, but a lot of the finishes and the furniture and that sort of thing was done by GM Design. I can tell you that this looks very similar to what it looks like today, and the office on the upper is virtually identical, and it's pretty magnificent to spend any time in. The GM Design Dome is our auditorium, and it's where virtually every vehicle that GM Design has created over the last 65 to 70 years has been reviewed by our leadership, both concept and product. That light source that you see there is such that it casts no shadow, and so it's the perfect place to kind of review those vehicles, and it's still a pretty magical place as well. All right, so that is like a very brief history of GM Design and a very brief look at the tech center. I'm going to talk about the archive just for a minute, and then we'll jump into the vehicles. So the GM Design Archive and Special Collections was founded in 2009 by my predecessor, Susan Skarsgård. She was a graphic designer and a calligrapher, and at the time we were going through bankruptcy. And a lot of folks had been let go at GM Design, including all of our librarians. And all of our librarians were the folks that kept our heritage. And she was concerned about this. And so she reached out to myself and some other colleagues within General Motors who worked in an archives function to determine what could be done. And we came up with a plan. I gave her two options. One option, just give it to us and we'll take care of it. It'll be great. She didn't like that. Option two, you need to fund a permanent institution within General Motors designed to take care of this. And she had the strength and the will to make that happen. And she did. And I'm so incredibly grateful that she did, because from that little founding, we've gotten to do so many amazing things. So our mission, very specifically, is to document and preserve the history of creative design at General Motors. Our collection includes a digital record of the artistic sketches that's somewhere in the neighborhood of 30,000, about 1 million photographs, physical sketches numbering in the thousands, internal business documents, and artifacts, and trim samples, and badges, and so on and so forth. We don't have a full-size scale model in our collection yet, probably because it wouldn't last the test of time, and we don't have the space for it, but maybe someday. So our process really starts with relationship building and acquisition. We spend a lot of time reaching out to folks in the community, like our friends here at the Savoy do, to make connections and to try to ferret out where things that may have left the building went. Design artwork was not intended to last. The sketch was a piece in the process, and it was intended for a very specific purpose. And for the most part, when it was used, it went in a drawer. When that drawer got full, it got thrown away. 99% or more of the sketches that were created at General Motors are long gone. We are very fortunate that there are many folks out in the world that work there that found value in those sketches and decided to take them home, oftentimes illegally. Sometimes they were managers of a studio and they wrote themselves a pass, so maybe semi-legally. But they brought them home, and now we can document them, and that's pretty amazing. So you can see kind of the acquisition process, and we're digitizing. One of the unheralded steps in the archival process is metadata creation, making sure we can actually find these things. So we have folks that describe what you're seeing and allow them to be found in digital systems. And then we have a team, a small team, that works with clients and customers, both internal and external, to find content when they need it to tell their stories or to tell our stories. So these are some sketches by David Holes that we recently uncovered. I thought they were appropriate for tonight since I am here for the Fin show, and David was very instrumental in the 1950s Cadillac fins. I'm quite fond of the fins in the upper right-hand corner that approximate the 57 Eldorado. We talk to designers, retired designers. We try to document their careers. We try to document whatever they might have in their possession that can help add to the story. This isn't always sketches. Sometimes this is paperwork. Sometimes this is stories. It's not always designers. Sometimes it's clay sculptors or engineers or folks that worked in fabrication shop. We talked to a gentleman that was in the paint shop for many, many years that told us the only reason he worked at General Motors Design was because he was an excellent softball player, and Harley Earl wanted a good softball team. So we do oral histories, and these are oftentimes very fun, and they add color to the historic record. Documents and photographs are a snippet in time, and they're very finite, and they only tell you exactly what's there. The folks that were there can give color to that, can bring anecdote. Oftentimes those stories contradict what we may already know, or they contradict what is in the written record. Sometimes we think that perhaps they're just remembering wrong, but it's all fun. We do historic research both for external and internal folks. I think I mentioned that a little bit earlier. Internally, what we do is we're trying to help all the other functions within General Motors tell the stories. So for instance, the Cadillac Goddess, which originated in the 1930 Cadillac and found its way on most Cadillacs from 1930 to 1956, has been resurrected in recent years. And we helped kind of formulate that story for the design team and take them to where they needed to go. That's just one example. National Historic Landmark requires architectural research. So whenever a renovation is going to happen, we work with the folks doing that renovation to ensure that what they're doing happens in the spirit of how Saarinen would have wanted the campus to evolve. I personally think that most of what we do to change the campus would be seen is within the spirit. It might not be aesthetically pleasing to those in the past, but the modularity of the campus was always built in, so I always think that that is something that Saarinen would have appreciated. We do exhibitions. So we have a gallery in our archive space. It's probably in the neighborhood of 1,000 to 1,200 square feet. And we can put on fairly elaborate exhibitions. We're very fortunate that we have an incredible industrial design team that sits right above us, and where all of us are paper jockeys and librarians and photographers. They can take our ideas and make them amazing. So from left to right, a show about an industrial designer named Carl Bankert on the left. He was really instrumental in the look of GM's shows during the 1950s. A show celebrating all the craftspeople at General Motors, the folks that don't design but maybe sculpt or fabricate or paint or sew and put together trim pieces. And then we did a Corvette show, a mid-engine Corvette show when that car was about to be launched a few years back. Our current show is Standard of the World. It's about Cadillac design, and it's intended to showcase the legacy of Cadillac design and juxtapose it with where the Cadillac design direction is going today. So sketches and photographs and artifacts and that sort of thing. We have, as I said, we have an incredible industrial design team, but we also have the benefit of having that shop. So anything that we need fabricated, for the most part, we can do so long as they have the time to do it. One of the coolest things, I mentioned being very fortunate to be in this position and to have the benefit of General Motors' support to do our activities, and that my predecessor fought to build the organization that I now run. Without that, I wouldn't be in the position to do this or a lot of the different things that we've had the chance to do. And one of those was to go to Spain in April of last year and support Motion Autos Art and Architecture at the Guggenheim Bilbao. We sent this car, we sent the Firebirds, and we built a clay modeling studio in one of the galleries, which was pretty fantastic. As you can see from the time lapse, during the opening events, 4 Cadillac sculptors worked in 4-hour shifts to create, to show the process. And for us, it's exposing people to the artistry of the design process. And watching people just stand there and just be enraptured by what they were doing was incredibly gratifying. And you know, in my dream world, there's some young person that stood there and watched, and they're gonna want to do that in the future. So we also held a clay sculpting workshop on the weekend. Again, giving folks the opportunity to actually work with clay and understand what it's like to build a scale model. So this is a hard transition. So we're going to talk about the cars next. So I thought it would be important to introduce the concept of the GM Heritage Collection. General Motors has about 600 cars in its Heritage Collection. Milestone production models, concept cars, show cars, race cars, one-offs, that sort of thing. This is a look inside the Heritage Center, the former Heritage Center in Sterling Heights, Michigan. We just moved out of there. Our new building is not ready yet, so I don't have new things to show you. But this is what it looked like. And typically we would have about 150 cars in the room. I am mostly responsible for concept cars because of my role with design. So sometimes I get to go out on show with them, which is kind of cool. And I get to, you know, talk to folks that are wandering around and show them this and that. And I don't get to drive the cars. They don't let me do that. That's probably good, but it is fun to talk about them. So on the left, that's Chattanooga, and we took Cyclone and 2 of the Firebirds there, I think at 21. And this is the Cadillac Fall Festival with a bunch of Cadillac concepts. Say it again? Yeah, Gilmore. Yeah, right on. Mm-hmm. All right, so I'm running a little long, so we're going to go a little faster now. This is the portion that I show you cool pictures from the archive. So fins. They originated with Cadillac. The first Cadillac with fins was 1948, 48 to 1964. One of the cool things about Cadillac fins is they evolved over time, and they were always changing. These gentlemen happen to be the folks that were most involved with the evolution of fins at design over time. Harley Earl, we've talked about him. Frank Hershey, who, if you have read any of the fantastic plaques out in the gallery, was the one who originated the fin in his. This was during the war. He originated the fin in his barn and sold it to Harley Earl. Ed Glowacki, who was head of Cadillac Studio during the 1950s. Chuck Jordan, who would go on to be a vice president in the 1980s, who succeeded Ed Glowacki as head of Cadillac Studio, and David Holes, who happened to be in the studio during that time and is credited with the 59 fin. So story goes that Harley Earl took some of his designers to an Air Force base just north of Detroit, and they saw the P-38 Lightning, and they were enamored with it. And one of them, Frank Hershey, started sketching and modeling cars with fins. And this was prior to the war. This would have been 40, 41-ish. Of course, the war interrupts things, and all of the activities of the automotive industry kind of shifted to defense production, right? So when they start to return, they're looking at, okay, post-war, and we start working on civilian cars again. Frank Hershey is modeling, not necessarily Cadillacs, but he's modeling cars with fins. And these photographs are scale models from 1943. 48, the first fin. This is a beautiful Fleetwood 60 Special. It's a beautiful sedan. I believe this one's in our collection. Clay model of the fins. You can see at this point they think it's going to come out in 47. It's delayed a little bit. But the fin is pretty much done in 1946. This is my favorite 48 Cadillac. It's the 61 Series two-door coupe with the fastback. I just think it's really racy looking. And I mean, that's completely exaggerated, but it's pretty great looking. The funny thing about fins is they were a little controversial, both at design and between design and the brand. And so in 1948, shortly after the 48 fin had launched, they're modeling the 50. And you can see from the photographs, they're not quite sure that the 50 is going to have fins. You can see on the fender there. But it does. So, and, you know, the story carries on. Again, I mentioned that they kind of change over time, so this is a smattering of clay models of fins during that era. 54 Cadillac up in the upper left, the 55 Eldorado Brome show car, the 55 Eldorado Brome production car, which we do have one of and is limited and spectacular, 58 Eldorado, or sorry, 57 Eldorado Biarritz, and then the 58 fin. It's you know, it's evolving. And then, of course, you have the 59. So in February of 57, you can see that it's a little bit different shape, and it's maybe a little bit more tame. And then they decided that they needed to put these rocket ship lights on it. So that's what happened. The Eldorado Brome gets a second generation for 5960. It's a more elegant car, and it's leading the way to what the fins are going to look like in the 60s. But you can see from these photographs in 1958 that they were thinking perhaps no fins. This one's one of my favorites, 61. So this is the design process for the 61 Cadillac. You can see the sketch where the fins are much further forward, and it's almost like a rocket ship. And they modeled it in both scale and full size before they came to their senses and pulled those fins all the way to the back. And this is kind of where the fins end in 64, and I'm just showing a little bit of the evolution over time from January of 1961 to I think it's February of 1962. They're evolving subtly over time. So I went through that pretty quick. But here are all the fins. And in 1965, the fin goes away, and Cadillac decides on this vertical lighting signature that gives a hint of the fin. And that vertical lighting signature is something that Cadillac designers continue to go back to today. They see that as a hallmark of Cadillac design. But it wasn't all Cadillacs. So obviously the fin starts with a Cadillac, and it pervades the industry, and many brands have fins. Some of my favorites are the Firebirds. You have the dorsal fins on Firebird 1 and Firebird 2, and then that crazy array of fins on Firebird 3. I thought this was fun. So the 59 Buick is really a beautiful, elegant car, but if that hit the road with that dorsal fin, I don't think so. And why don't we put fins on a Corvette? I mean, because why not? All right. Vega. The car that we loaned here is the very first Vega that ever came off the line. I personally think it's a very sporty, elegant-looking little car. It has a mixed reputation, maybe. But from a design standpoint, very specifically, I think it's good looking. It started life as an experimental program called XP887. It was always envisioned as a family of vehicles. So I don't want to call it a sedan, but a two-door coupe, a fastback, a wagon, and in these are full-size airbrushes. You can see they're even thinking about maybe a little pickup called the Scrambler. Some photographs of both scale models and the full-size clays. What I haven't talked about full-size clay is that what we do is we wrap them in something that we refer to as Dynoc, but it's like a wallpaper. It's like an aluminum foil wallpaper, and it can be painted. So the clay models that we see like running around design oftentimes look like finished vehicles, and it's pretty fantastic, and that's kind of what you're seeing here. The sculpting, I just threw in these pictures because it's cool to see what the studio looks like at the time. If you were to walk into Design Center today, it would look very much like this. The cars would be bigger, they would be trucks, and there would be computer monitors here and there, but it would look very, very similar. Again, you're seeing we've carried this family of cars through. These are fiberglass models. The shops will build hard models for evaluation after the clay model design process is kind of complete. And at this point, this vehicle is being badged as the Lynx. A Lynx was a program, not necessarily a program, but it was a brand name that was being thrown around within the corporation at a time when GM was experimenting with rotary engine power, and they were thinking about going to production with rotary powered vehicles, and perhaps it was going to be this small H-body. Still don't have a name. Here it's called a Scamp. So very soon it's going to become Vega. Fun fact, the Vega name can be seen on photographs of the very first Firebirds in the design process. So my guess is they just had a list of names and they're just, I'm sure it was more scientific than that. So this is 1957. The gentleman standing behind the car on the right is an automotive designer named Peter Brock. Peter Brock designed the Corvette Stingray, and he went on to design the Shelby Daytona Coupe. But he worked for GM for about 2 years in 1957, in 58, I believe. And the story goes, at least the story he told me, was that he was in the studio one night late, and Harley Earl walked in, and he got scared. And he was like, I've never seen Harley Earl. He's like 6'7" and was a little nervous. I was just a young guy. And Harley walked up to him and he said, what are you working on? And he said, this and that. And he's like, well, what do you want to work on? And he said, I would like us to have a car for college students, something small and sporty. And he said, well, why don't you design it for me? And this is what he designed. And I show these because I think they kind of foreshadow what Vega was a little bit later. I have no evidence of this, but sometimes I wonder if these actually influenced the design, because these clay models were in storage until at least 1968. Maybe. It won Motor Trend's Car of the Year, so I mean, at the time it was a success. I think the reputation got the best of it after the fact, but it's again, I think it's a cute little car. And I can't talk about Vega without talking about the way it was shipped from the factory to the dealership. And this is the Vertipaq system. So these cars were put up on end and shipped by rail. It doesn't seem like the most efficient way to do things or cost effective, but they make for great photographs. So the next, not really the next, but one of the next small cars that General Motors did was the Chevette. It launched in '76 here in the States. We loaned a very low mileage car with a fantastic interior. We'll talk about that. It started life as XP949, which was an international program. So General Motors had brands around the world at the time, and this was done in an international studio, and it was meant to be a global car. And so these Chevette full-size drawings you can see are badged as our German brand Opel. Scale model on our design patio. It's starting to take shape here. I think this one is actually branded Vauxhall. And I'm pretty sure Vauxhall was the first one that launched Chevette. And then by this point, it's in the Chevrolet studio, and for the North American audience, they're going to put it on the T platform, so that's why it's referred to as the T car. And these are sketches by Ron Will that have survived, and you can see they're starting to give it some Chevrolet brand character. Clay models. I just always love clay model pictures. But we're in Chevy Studio at this point. And then fiberglass models, not because they are kind of repetitious, but the fiberglass models because you're seeing what's happening in the studio, and this car is being done alongside the Corvette and the Camaro and the Vega and the Nova and all of the smaller cars that Chevrolet was putting out in the market at the time. So there was a lot of cross-pollination, whether the Camaro and Corvette designers would agree with me or not. Here are some interior design studies, so you can see some sketches on the left and some show properties on the right of door panels and and seats. That is in the color room at GM Design, which is a big donut in the middle of the building. Some more sketches. I think these are kind of fun because they're kind of exploring where Chevette could go. Up on the left, you're seeing something a little bit more elegant. It's badged as Berlinetta. And then on the right, we're going off-road with the Chevette. Why not? But instead of that, we got a Woody. And it cost you $300, which I suppose at the time was a lot of money. But it's, you can get simulated wood grain for $300. I mentioned the interior. So the interior of our Chevette is the bicentennial interior. It's a big hit back home. Everybody is really drawn to this car. And the thing that I think, apparently it cost about $180 for this interior, which was, again, a fair amount of money. But the thing I think is cool is that the RPO code is 1776. So it's just fun. Anyhow, so this is kind of where I leave you. I'm going to shill for the GM Design Instagram here. If you want to see more things both from the archive and what's coming out of the studio today, I encourage you to follow us on Instagram at General Motors Design. We put out photography weekly, I believe, but our studio friends are putting new content out all the time and kind of not necessarily teasing what's coming in the future, but just kind of showing the incredible breadth of artistic talent that's at Design. So thank you.
All right. Thanks, Christo. So we'll open it up for questions. So again, if you would, please wait for us to get the microphone to you.
Don't make me look bad. It's really easy.
So I did hear that you love the fins. So other than a finned car, though,
Yeah.
by make, model, and year, what do you think is the penultimate design by GM?
So for me, it kind of changes. I'm not born and bred a car person. I'm not. I know it's heresy. But having the collection kind of in the other room, they're like children, I guess, in that you see something new all the time or something becomes your favorite. Some of my favorites are the 1963 Buick Riviera. I think that's an absolutely beautiful car. The 1934 to 37 Cadillac Aerodynamic Coupe is a beautiful car. Different eras, obviously, totally different design thinking. Honestly, I like the little fastbacks. So like the I mentioned the 61 series Cadillac, but also the is it the 49 Chevrolet Aero sedan, Fleetline Aero sedan. So those are some. I tend to like the smaller cars too. The first Chevy 2s, kind of boxy. I think those are pretty great looking. So yeah, I don't know what the penultimate design is, but I can tell you which ones I think are really great and stand the test of time. And I guess you can't really say anything bad about a 55 Chevy either. So.
Since you showed the Vega, I remember reading when the car first came out that the roofline on both the notchback and the fastback were actually persuaded by Italian design, and that the notchback resembled a Fiat model and the fastback resembled a Ferrari model. Do you know how much of that actually went on as far as inspiration, say by cars of Europe, in the design studio?
A lot. Yeah, I can tell you, I've not heard that specifically, but it doesn't surprise me at all, especially because they were sporty cars. GM Design would routinely purchase cars and bring them into the studio for competitive comparison. And a lot of those designers of that era were very fond of kind of the Italian cars and that. Yeah.
One more question regarding the Chevette. I know that Vauxhall sold the Chevette as well. Did the other worldwide GM divisions sell the car? And was there any objection to the fact that it was not a front-wheel drive car at a time when most of the world was headed in that direction?
I can't answer the second part of that question. I'm not smart enough. However, I can tell you that the Chevette, or a vehicle based on that platform, was sold all over the world. So in the UK, it was the Vauxhall Chevette. In Germany, it was, I believe it was a Kadett. It was the Opel Kadett. The Opel Kadett was a vehicle that was exported into numerous regions around the globe. I'm not sure if Holden had one in Australia, but yeah. And then of course the Chevette was, there were versions for some of the other American brands as well.
It's sold in Canada as a Pontiac.
Yeah, probably the Acadian, I think. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I can tell you that we had a couple gentlemen from Germany here last week, and one was from Opel, and he spent more time on that Chevette because he was pointing out all the Opel parts on the interior. Oh, hey, we made this, so it was kind of interesting.
How about the Corvair? Can we talk about that, or is that an off subject?
I think we can talk about it. I don't see who's talking. Oh, yes, let's talk about the Corvair.
Corvair.
Yes. What do you want? What do we want to talk
Any
about?
reaction, thought about that?
I love the Corvair.
I thought it was a great car, but unfortunately Ralph Nader was a contemporary.
Yeah. No, it's a from a design standpoint, both the first and the second generations are beautiful. The first one is very European for the time. Obviously, from a technology standpoint, it's kind of radical being rear engine, at least for an American car. The troubles that were popularized were resolved they were real, but they were resolved relatively quickly. Bill Mitchell, who was in charge of design at the time, loved the Corvair, absolutely loved it, and he did many Corvair customs and concepts over the years. The Corvair Monza GT, the Monza SS, the Super Spider. In our collection, we have a custom 69 Corvair that belonged to Mitchell, and it's this custom orange color. It's so bright. It's like this crazy pearlescent orange color. It's really, really bright. And the story I was told by a retired designer is that Mitchell had that car done so that he could park it next to the head of Chevrolet at the country club and rub it in his nose because he blamed Pete Estes for the death of the Corvair. So I mean, it jives with the Mitchell that I know from stories. So, but that second generation, it would have been the hardtop coupe. It's a pretty little car. So, yeah, I mean, it met a tough fate during that period. And General Motors didn't do itself any favors by surveilling Ralph Nader. I can tell you that the Corvair fan base is amongst the most loyal and rabid across the board. I mean, they're so dedicated to that car.
I have an addendum to that. 2 years ago, I happened to visit a museum I'd never heard of. There's actually a small Corvair museum in central Illinois. It's actually right on Route 66. It's not very big, but it's all Corvair. I think they said one of the cars they have is the last Corvair ever built.
Sure.
And it's, if anyone's a fan of Corvair, they need to look it up because I had never heard of the place. It's not very big, but it's dedicated entirely to Corvair. Mm-hmm. And it's right there in somewhere between Chicago and Springfield, I believe.
Yeah, I think I've heard of that. And there's another one, I think, in Ypsilanti, Michigan as well, near where they were built at Willow Run. It's, like I said, the folks that love Corvairs. And one of the cool things about Corvair was, again, it was a family of vehicles, right? So it was not just the coupe and the sedan, but also there was a wagon, and there was the ramp side pickup and the Greenbrier van. So it was this kind of concept of a whole model line.
I just had a question. To me, a lot of modern cars are very similar, and I understand a lot of it is like safety and environmental concerns, aerodynamics, and things like that. So, in the modern process, where exactly can the design team start work if they know we have these limitations as far as all kinds of things related to safety and aerodynamics? Do they start with a template, or do they start with a fresh sheet and someone looks at it afterward?
It really depends on the program, and it depends on who is leading the design. So one of the tensions within the process is between engineering and manufacturing and design. What can we build, but what should we build? Or what do we want to build? And if you're starting with all of these hard points, then obviously you have to kind of design to that, and you have to keep the brand character. But if you start with design from a vision standpoint, then the engineering can follow later. And oftentimes that can happen, but it typically happens with special vehicles, at least today. But I agree with you that oftentimes the cars kind of take a similar shape. But I think if you were to step way back and kind of look at cars from various eras, you would see a similar thing. And obviously we romanticize this era. I romanticize it. But 50s cars looked like 50s cars. I mean, there were oddballs, but for the most part, if you put them in like a silhouette, just like black silhouette, you might be able to tell, oh, that's a Cadillac because of those fins. But the size and their proportion and the shapes are oftentimes going to be very similar. And I think that's the same with today's cars as well. Not giving anybody a pass, I just think that sometimes it takes perspective.
You had mentioned that the GM Heritage collection is closed.
Yes.
Is it going to open again somewhere else?
Yes, it is. So at the end of 2022, we moved out of our facility that had been opened, I guess, for something like 13 years. The new facility will be closer to Flint. Flint being a very important place in General Motors history. Chevrolet, Buick, AC Sparkplug, AC Delco. We have a facility up there. We were in a leased facility prior, so what we could do with the building was very limited. But the new facility is 3 times the size, and it is a GM-owned facility, and it's going to offer a lot of opportunities for showcasing vehicles and for storytelling. but my partners in the heritage team have a lot of work to do, and it's going to be a little while, but it's going to be back for sure. In the meantime, we get to take vehicles out on the road. So,
Okay, we got time for another question, and then we'll let you guys come down here if you want to take pictures or whatever. Any more questions?
So the cousin to the Chevy Vega was the Pontiac Astra.
right on.
My dad had purchased one brand new in '76. And do you have any interesting stories about that?
I don't.
Okay.
I wish I did. I wish I did. Like I said at the beginning, I'm not really a nuts and bolts person, and with Vega, you know, some of the stories I know from showcasing the vehicle we have, and I did a little digging. I'm just going to be honest. I did a little digging so we could share some of that, and I probably should have spread it out a little bit, but I did not. So I apologize.
Oh, no, you're fine. Thank you.
Okay, last one. Go ahead.
The prints and drawings and all that are in the archives, are they available for purchase in prints and things, or is it copyrighted?
So they're not available for purchase. They're available for research. Most of them we don't have physical drawings of, and while technically we probably own the intellectual property there, we had to have a very soft touch with folks that saved these things. So they're in. Most of them remain in their possession, and we have a gentleman's agreement. Basically, we're documenting it, but you own the property, so to speak. So they go up for sale often, and sometimes it's disappointing to folks like me who would like to preserve them kind of as a collection, and so you can see the breadth of somebody's work or the evolution of a vehicle or what have you. But I can't blame anybody for, you know, trying to make a few bucks if, you know, they need it. So, yeah.
Okay, this is the last one. One more.
This really isn't so much a car question, but
Yay.
the beautiful Chevette that you've loaned us, I noticed that in the Ford Museum they have a men's jacket made out of the upholstery material, and so I wondered, was that like a one-off and maybe a way of Ford taking a dig, or did that actually happen in '76 where a line of those jackets were made?
Oh gosh, I have no idea.
And
but
who would
now I
ever
need to
wanna
look
wear
into
one?
it. Yeah, would I wear one? Oh. Oh, I don't. You know, people have different taste. I mean, some people could pull that off, maybe. No, I honestly don't know, but now I'm gonna look into it.
Okay, thanks everybody. So we really appreciate you coming. Thanks
Thank
to
you.
Christo. And if you would like to come down or take a couple pictures, and then we'll be on our way. Thanks. See ya. Bye-bye.
Thank you, everybody.